sent you an email asking you to call me because central government, I was on a committee with Louis Lewis and THA, Sandra Orr. We've already done the improved incentives. So, and the previous THA had input into it.
Okay.
But for some reason, government is not taking it to cabinet.
In our destiny, we
Can we remain standing for the prayer? Ms. Marsha Lyons.
Good morning, everyone. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We give you all the glory, all the honor, and all the praise, for you alone are worthy. Lord, we are so thankful that we can come together for such an event that would sensitize and provide education to all on matters concerning our budget and how it affects we, the people of Tobago, and by extension, Trinidad and Tobago. We ask your blessings on this morning's proceedings. Bless all our speakers and our presenters, and take complete control. These things we ask in no other name but your holy and precious name. Amen.
You may be seated. Thank you, Marsha. Thank you very much for that inspiring note of prayer. I want to remind all that we are streaming live on Tobago Update, YouTube, and Facebook. So come on in according to the statement, share the live, share the live, share the live. This morning I want to say I want to welcome each and every one of you. And in particular, I want to welcome the panelists who in their diverse means and minds would bring some level of interesting perspective on the budget that was read by the Chief Secretary and debated in our House. This is our first event of hosting a post-budget debate. This would be continuous, and it would be an event that you can look forward to every year going forward. And so with that, I would also want to, we don't usually have thank you before an event, but I think it's pristine that I say thank you to Mr. Sylvan Rollox and his family for allowing us to use his conference hall free of charge for this event. I think that is very, very immaculate. And I think I need a round of applause for that. And so let's get started on this pristine event that will impact on all of us here in Tobago, whether it's $1 or $3.9 billion. It is our intent to share and make it work for us in the way we think it should. And this is why we compiled such an interesting panelists to bring their perspective on what it means to them and the communities and the island on a whole. So without further ado, I want to introduce to you Mr. Anselm Richards, who is the technical advisor in the Division of Finance, the Economy, and Trade. Mr. Richards is a well-known positive economist, and he will bring you the views he aspired on the budget. Mr. Richards.
Morning. Thank you, Brendan, for those warm words of introductory. Let me say good morning to the other panelists, and good morning to those who are viewing live online and those who are with us present. It's a pleasure for me to be here to share with all. I am here representing the THA in my capacity as the Chief Technical Advisor in the Division of Finance, Trade, and the Economy, and also sitting in on behalf of the Honorable Chief Secretary, Mr. Farley Augustine, who is unavoidably cannot be with us this morning. So he asked me to sit in for him. Okay, let's get into the meat of the issue. The 2023 fiscal package, as presented by the Chief Secretary last Thursday, was really designed to call Tobago and the national community to order, alerting them to the dangers that we are facing as a country, both from the global perspective. You know, we are in 3 critical global events. The pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic. We have climate change, and we have the Russia-Ukraine war that has changed the world and has changed the world significantly. And those were the international issues that we looked at and the kind of effect that those are generating for the world at large and our region and our country. We also look at the trending in terms of energy prices and where that is likely to go. We look at the world travel and how that is resuscitating from the impact of the pandemic. And we also look at our own domestic and home affairs as to what is happening on the ground and what we need to respond. So when we look at what is happening in terms of the COVID pandemic, we recognize that, look, the situation requires us to take a basic need approach. And that was the approach that the administration took on assuming office, trying to satisfy the basic need of every child, family, and village, with the constraint of the fiscal resources that they inherited from the last administration. So that was a strategic decision that was taken, that they are going to go at the strategic level, dealing with basic need, and that was articulated in the budget. That does not take away the fact that there's a longer term, a mid-term, and a longer term vision as to where they want to go with the island, and therefore that was articulated in the budget. The budgetary process of the THA is really one that speaks to a bottom-up process. And let me just explain that. What happens is that you receive the submission from the divisions, and you collate them, you align them with the policy agenda of the administration, and you build out the budget narrative, including the selection of projects and programs. And then you calculate the budget numbers based on the budget parameters, which is really what the national budget is likely to be and what is predicated against in terms of the Dispute Resolution Commission. So that sets up the budget frame, and you build the budget in that context. So what we would have done, we would have first used 20 years of data and forecast what the national budget is likely to be in 2023. And on that, we predicated the revenue that Tobago is likely to be allocated based on the Dispute Resolution Commission decision that was accepted by the national community. And we went for the higher end of 6.9%. And when we projected the national budget for 2023, it is likely to be $57.4 billion. And if we take 6.9% of that, we are somewhere in the vicinity of 3.9 billion. And that sets up the budget frame for us. And we build our programs and our projects along that line. We receive the submissions from the divisions. We also look at some of the manifesto promise or the mandate promises of the administration, because we are in the process of building out a longer-term development agenda, a plan, an economic strategy for the transformation of the island. That work is being led by Dr. Vanus James. We have started some of the preliminary research. There are some calculation that was done, that was used in the budget document, but Dr. James will speak to that as we go along. So basically what we did, we looked across the THA, we looked at where the gaps are, we looked at the challenges that we have been identifying over the last 20 plus years, and we tried to build out the programs and the project that will respond to those gaps and those challenges that we would have had. And we have been identifying and quarreling about for the last 20 years. So public administration was a big issue. We know that productivity in the public sector in Tobago is very low. We know that our systems are very weak, for want of a better description. We know our public servants need to be upgraded in terms of their skills. There is a dire need for the digitization of the public service. And therefore, that form a big chunk of the budget in terms of public service reform and public service transformation in terms of the digitization effort. Productivity, also in the agricultural sector, was identified as an issue. It is even lower than across the wider THA system. I think it's averaging 44% thereabout when we calculated the GDP and we see the share of the agricultural sector. So productivity in the agricultural sector is a significant issue. So we spoke to that because we recognize also that there is a global food crisis, and therefore we have to respond in our own way in terms of our food sovereignty program, and the agricultural sector presents itself as the vehicle for that to happen. But we recognize that we have to reform and transform the agricultural sector, and that cannot be done through access road. There has to be an institutional arrangement that leads the transformation of agriculture, and that's why the Tobago Agricultural Research Institute, TARI, you will see that was featured in the budget, will be the institution that will do that kind of brain work to lead the transformation of the agricultural sector, that will do the kinds of research and inquiry to bring smart climate, smart technology to bear on what we are doing in agriculture. There has to be a marrying of appropriate technology with labor to transform the agricultural sector in Tobago. There's also a proposal to establish 2 mega farms of no less than 100 acres per farm. That is to give the oomph, as it were, the young people will say, to the agricultural sector, because if we talk in productivity, we have to also talk scale. We cannot transform the Tobago economy by the cottage industry style that we have been used to over the years. We have to upscale to industrial size operations, whether it's in specialized areas, and that kind of thinking has to inform the way we go forward. So agriculture is one. We're also looking, a major issue that is confronting us in Tobago is coastal erosion. And that has its genesis in climate change and all of that. That took up a very significant part of the budget because we saw the climate issue as very important, especially for small island states like ours. And there was a very long technical conversation as to what needs to be done. We have done some preliminary work with the CDB, the Caribbean Development Bank. There was a technical team that visited, and we did some site visits looking at the erosion across the island. And I can tell you, it is very serious. We are losing landmass rapidly, and the erosion is getting more aggressive. The projected cost to deal with a technical solution to the coastal erosion, casually from the technical team, is in excess of $1.2 billion, TNT currency. So that's the kind of problems that we are facing on the island in terms of the coastal erosions. And it's not only in Southwest Tobago, it's around the island that we are facing that. So that was an important thing. Youth development. The investment in youth development is an investment in our future. the youth are our next leaders, caretakers, stewards of this island, and therefore that formed a very significant part of the conversation. Being a youth leader himself, the Chief Secretary thought that he has to make or start making the investment in the young people of Tobago, positioning them to take leadership as we go along the path of our development trajectory. So youth development formed a very significant part of the budget conversation. We also had the issue of sport and youth, which is also part of the youth development agenda, because we see that we can use sport as the vehicle to create real meaningful livelihood for some of our young people, and even to instill discipline, because we're having some issues with discipline on the island. And if you look across the budget, you will see also that there's that whole sporting issue that comes from the community level up into the school system and into the professional area. So sport is a very significant chunk of the budget. We also spoke to the issue of tourism. We recognize that while we need to diversify, and even diversify within the tourism sector itself, it will take some time for us to diversify the Tobago economy away from tourism. And I don't see how we can diversify it away from tourism, but more internally diversifying it within the tourism sector itself. So we looked at that. We looked at some new approach to the way we do business in terms of investors. They come and they require significant concessions, lands and taxes and so forth. And we have to start thinking strategically and a little bit more smart in the way we do business. So a company comes to invest in Tobago and they want a couple hundreds of millions of dollars in concession. How do we negotiate that? Are we going to monetize that as part of our equity holding in the company? Are we going to give up state lands for free to private investors? Or are we going to use the value of that state land as the people's equity in those establishments? Those are the kinds of conversation that is taking place at the level of the executive to approach these development from a more strategic standpoint, as to ensure that at the end of the day, there is some real benefit coming to Tobagonians from the bottom line of those operations. So we are looking at those initiatives, we are looking at those developmental issues, and the idea is to ensure that Tobagonians benefit and their owners or part owners as far as possible as to the utilization of state resources for private enterprises. So, I have more time? About 3 more minutes. Okay, we spoke also about the orange economy, and that was tagged on to the tourism sector. Significantly, we think that if we are building a new tourism product, it has to be built around probably festivals, the arts, to give the product some more currency, as it were. And we think that our arts and our artists can provide that kind of input into the tourism sector. So the Tobago Performing Arts Company, TPAC, that will be the institution that's going to lead the development of the orange economy. That's a company, and it's not a dance company in the way some people conceive it to be, but it is a registered company, a limited liability company that has a board of directors and a CEO and an operating staff. So that will be something like, for want of a better description, the UDICOT in the building out of the orange economy in Tobago. We also spoke to the issue of the blue economy, which is really our marine space and the commercialization of business activity in that space. You know, we know the issue of oil and gas is dear to our heart. We are approaching that with some level of purposefulness in terms of negotiating revenue sharing arrangement where the gas and oil resources are concerned, the monetization of that. We are hoping to go to the table and negotiate a new revenue sharing arrangement for the revenues from the oil and gas that are exploited off the waters of Tobago, in keeping with that which exists between the federal government of Canada and the provincial government of Nova Scotia, where there is a threshold, and we are hoping that once we establish that arrangement with the central government, every revenue above the established threshold goes to a Tobago Offshore Revenue Fund, which is like our provincial funds that will be for the next generation of Tobagonians. We think the time has come for us to move away from that position where Tobago is only entitled to 4.03 cents of every $100 that is extracted or collected from the revenues that are exploited from the oil and gas in our waters. I think we need to change the conversation. I think we need to change the arrangement to ensure that Tobago and Tobagonians benefit in a more direct way and a more purposeful way in terms of those revenues that are exploited. I think 2 more minutes.
That was a long minute.
Yeah, that is a long minute. Okay. Another area is our business development. The THA has a number of business development initiatives that has been in operation for a number of years. We have the business development unit that gives grants and loans for the development of the business sector. We have the venture capital fund, equity fund. We have EID Cut, which is the company that oversees the operation of the Cove Industrial Estate. The research done thus far has pointed to the fact that these projects has not delivered the way they were designed and intended to. It was mentioned in the budget. We have looked at the numbers. On the BDU side, the loan portfolio is carrying a delinquency ratio of about 38%, which is not good by any standard. The venture capital, they have invested in about 5 investee companies. 80% of them are experiencing significant financial stress even before COVID. So something is drastically wrong in the way these programs have been operating over the years. What we recognize also from the research and the examination of this program, sometimes we think the problem is cash, we think the problem is finance. But sometimes what these companies really need is technical assistance in terms of business processes, how to do the books, how to manage cash flow, how to file their statutory obligations. Because we have a situation now where the THA is looking to provide some kind of liquidity facility for businesses in Tobago. A number of, I think, they are approaching, we have been in conversation with the banks to work out a program. I think we are looking to provide a $60 million facility. But when we examine the state of play, there are significant challenges in terms of business acumen among our business operators in Tobago. The government has a program that runs for 7 years that provides a maximum of $600,000 in cash to businesses. It runs for 7 years. You have no obligation to provide any security. It is tax-free. You have 2 years moratorium to start paying, and then you pay back that $600,000 in 5 years, which is 60 months, which works out, no interest, which works out to $10,000 per month for 5 years. And a number of our businesses in Tobago cannot participate in that program. And something has to be wrong with the way we do business in Tobago. And we need to correct that. We need to collectively hold our hands and look at the problems in our business sector in Tobago. There is no escaping the reality that there is significant problem among our business sector in Tobago. We also spoke to the issue of the establishment of a Tobago Development Bank. That is a long outstanding issue that has been around since in the Hutchell Charles administration. Nothing has happened. This administration is bent on ensuring that something happens in the next 4 years. So we had conversation with the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, the governor and the deputy governor and the senior staff at the bank. And this issue was placed on the table, and they endorsed the concept and the idea of establishing a financial institution of this nature in Tobago. We also had conversations with the officers and visiting team from the Caribbean Development Bank. They also, and I think Dr. Jane participated in those conversations, so he can add his 2 cents when he receives the mic, Dr. Vanna James. And they were also very interested in the concept of establishing a Tobago Development Bank. They are disposed to financing the study of a concept paper and to assist in building out the governance arrangement, which will be the most challenging part of a development bank, to ensure that it is not used as a political vehicle, as it were. So we are making significant headway where that is concerned. I think the Chief Secretary is preparing to write to the Central Bank to activate that promise, get that process moving. Definitely, and for the bankers who are amongst us, I think that we in Tobago have recognized that the financial services sector, as constituted now, is not working in the interest of Tobagonian and the people of Tobago. And therefore, we have to make an intervention that will change the state of play. And we think that that intervention can come through a Tobago Development Bank. You see the kinds of services that was listed in the budget that the Tobago Development Bank will be providing. And I think that can be a game changer for us. Just imagine you have a Tobago-owned bank that is providing services to all our indigenous financial institutions like credit unions. They pay millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars to the commercial banks to handle their services, to change their checks and so forth, and to hold their reserves. Just imagine all that is deposited into one Tobago-owned bank and the possibilities that comes with that. Just imagine you have a Tobago Development Bank that is the bank of the THA, and we no longer pay the significant charges to the current bankers of the THA. Just imagine you have a Tobago Development Bank that provide cost-effective and cost-efficient loans to young Tobagonians who want to go and further their studies. Just imagine you have a Tobago Development Bank that provide land banking services to Tobagonians. And the list goes on and on. So we recognize and understand that the Tobago Development Bank will be a major shift in the way finances are handled in Tobago and how the Tobago financial sector develops going forward. We have to create what we call circular flows in income and revenues. We cannot have systems where when you spend $1, it leaves the Tobago economy almost immediately. We have to keep the money circulating in Tobago as long as possible. And we have to create the kinds of institutions and the kinds of opportunities for that to happen. And we have to be a bit deliberate in doing that. I don't want to say affirmative action, but we have to be deliberate in the way we conduct the business of this island. So I will pause here and allow the other panelists to have their say. Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Well done. Thank you, Mr. Richards. Well done. What we'll do, it's going to be questions after all the panelists are presented, and we will take them questions 3 at a time to make sure we get as many in. Yes? So our next presenter is Mr. Chris James. As you know, he's the president of the Tourism and Hotel and Tourism Association. And he has been a long-standing, I don't want to say adopted Tobagonian anymore. He's a Tobagonian, real Tobagonian. He's been here now since the 80s. Am I right, Chris?
30 years.
That's right. So he's a Tobagonian. So, Chris, it's all in your hands. You have the mic.
Thank you, Brendan. Good morning, everybody, all the viewers, everybody, all protocols observed. Anselm, you threw me. Did you say we're diversifying away from tourism?
Within this sector. Within.
Threw me a little bit because we haven't really been in tourism since 2008. So we've got a long way to go before we can be classed as a tourism destination. And I always get concerned when people talk about diversification. There's a saying that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. We can diversify into many things at once. We don't have to separate one to the other. We can diversify to many. So yes, it was a very long, very detailed budget. Concerned about the size of the recurrent budget against the kind of development budget, as always. We're also concerned because this region is going to see 40% less aircraft over the next 2 years. And with such little aircraft availability to us, and the fact that we have no non-stop flights, other than the JFK that's about to start picking up, I hope, that's a great concern for us. And worldwide, there is a problem with aircraft, with staffing, and aircraft that were parked up that were less efficient. So I mention that because I saw the budget for TTEL, which was 75 million. The other thing that concerned me was the labour force. It's admitted in the budget that 54% of the labour force works for THA and 46% for the...
Mike.
Not loud enough. Okay. 46% private sector. And yet it also goes on to say that in Trinidad, I'm guessing you're saying in this, 28% in private sector, 72% in private sector. Now, the concern about that, I've actually found a website where the average is around 20% worldwide, public sector. In fact, Russia is only 40% of government employees. And that dysfunctionality between private sector and public sector, there's only two solutions for that. Is that we either increase the working population that live in Tobago and get them employed, because we are short of workers, because it cannot honestly be sustained for a long term, having that recurrent expenditure the way it is. I like the phrase that the Chief Secretary used, service-led, tourism-driven, and government-powered. The association and myself have been pushing for a long time to get the 10% room tax paid into a tourism fund like most of the other islands in the region. At the moment, it goes into a consolidated fund. And you were talking about Tobago taking control of some of its finances. We really need to use that 10% room tax. It won't be much now, but as we build up, because it's a reward kind of system, because the better the agency and the industry does, the more that becomes, and the more money we have for spending. It didn't mention anything about the withholding tax. We have a problem with the industry in the peer-to-peer, the Airbnb product that's on the island, competing with hotels having to pay the 10%, but they're not paying any tax. Well, there is a withholding tax that can be stopped through Airbnb, and we need to look at that. I'm very pleased, as I'm sure Diane and most of the private sector is, that the land license is going to be removed. We have suffered from this land license since February 2007. It had a direct impact. If you look at the tourism arrivals from 2005 and after 2007, every year we have declined. And it's nothing to do with COVID. We've declined badly. And prior to COVID, the 4 years prior to COVID, we hovered around 19,000. Most islands in this region do more than that in a month. And the revenue we're losing because of that lack of investment, because one of the problems we have, as the Chief Secretary did state in the budget, because we don't have sufficient high-end rooms, we can't fill the front of the plane. Now, the front of the plane basically is 45% of the passenger load, but 85% of the revenue for the airline. So that is why we can get no non-stop flights to Tobago, because they want to fill the front of the plane, so they goes to Antigua, Barbados, or St. Lucia, wherever, and they can fill the front. So until we get that high-end quality rooms, which we should have had years ago, we've turned away so many opportunities over the years. I won't call brand names, but we've turned away a lot of people and that could have supplied that. The smaller properties benefit because they fill the back of the plane. And that's where the business model is. Small properties cannot in themselves bring planes. Airbnb cannot bring planes. It's the tour operator contracts with the airlines that give enough comfort to an airline to bring that plane. So we're really pleased that that land license will be done away with. Our original suggestion for that just so that I can put this down, is that we had suggested that areas should have been identified where people could not buy. Rather than designating the whole island as a no-go for foreign direct investment, we had suggested selecting areas that could not be offered to foreign investors. But it's taken too long. You mentioned about the public service, ease of doing business, and again, this goes along with attracting foreign direct investment. We have to improve the ease of doing business. It's got no better with the digital platforms. Half the time you can't get into them. Sometimes they just cut off after you spent half an hour filling out a form. So we need to improve that ease of doing business throughout, not just for people coming to buy here, the foreign direct investment, but us living here. It's very frustrating, very time consuming, and as you mentioned, productivity is already low. Certainly like the idea of the development bank. We have tried, the Chamber and the Hotel Association, over years. I have no idea how many years, but we started with a government loan guarantee. We've asked recently for consolidating existing loans because, as I said, the tourism industry has been going down for so long. We didn't enter COVID strong. Our finances were already weak. So we came into a situation where that was the last straw for many of the properties. So ideally, if we could get a process where we could consolidate loans over a longer period, 10, 15 years, with a moratorium until we pick up this tourism industry, get the airlift we need and get some investment, and actually start marketing. I mentioned the 75 million for TTEL. Back in 2016, the islands keep very close to their chest what they spend on marketing. And I won't call the name of the island, but I did find out a very close neighbor of ours spends $50 million on marketing. I know that is not available to us now, but it just shows you the different quantum. But then they put a greater value on tourism and monitoring the return on investment. So that's one of our problems. It goes into, just one second. Very pleased that we're supporting the Marriott because that will help. A lot of American visitors, when I was on the airlift committee, we approached American Airlines. They wanted a minimum to come here 3 times a week. Their visitors tend to stay 4 to 5 days, and they wanted this rotation, and we didn't have enough of the quality rooms. And the other thing we discovered is a lot of those Americans actually travel with points that they gained during the year. So they will only use branded airlines and branded hotels to stay. So that is something, Marriott is a very big plus to us. We also suggested on the foreign direct investment that we do shovel-ready sites. We had done a report, in fact, Diane and I had been part of a report with the previous administration, and we'd suggested getting some projects, some land sites, shovel-ready, so that when we go to investors, we can very confidently say, this is the size of property you can put on here, water and electricity will be supplied, and that would have been a very good buy-in for foreign investment, because over the years, and again, I know Diane and other people in the audience were at some of the events we did. One of them was shameful in Trinidad, where we basically insulted the foreign investors. So we have some ground to make up. Very pleased with the idea of creating and improving some of the historical sites. But we have to get to a stage where we can monetize that and get them professional enough so there's a shop, a toilet or something there, so people are prepared to pay. That is a very good thing because we do need more attractions in Tobago. The education and human capital, I don't know how long I've been asking for a manpower audit. The only way we're going to know where we are, because we know that we're short-staffed, even though we're not fully staffed, we need a manpower audit, not just in tourism, but across the island, because we seem to be getting a lot of people qualified in things that we don't need, and not enough people qualified in the things we do need. So I think we need to do a manpower audit, but also include those with experience, not necessarily paper qualifications. So at least we know what we have, because as investment comes in, as the Marriott is built, I think it was 450 full-time staff required. We're not going to have that staff ready. Some of those jobs take 2 to 3 years to train for. So that manpower audit is very important. The PRDI unit, we decry the time that was lost. I know you were there before, Anselm. We need tourism-specific data. Most of our data that we get is not disaggregated, and that's the only way we're going to prove the value of tourism to the destination Tobago. So we need that tourism, and we need it timely, because we need to know if we do some advertising, did it work? If it didn't work, we don't do that again. So, there's never 100% success in marketing and advertising, but we need a quick response with data coming out. The other thing I've mentioned many times before, tourism is not a one-division industry. We need all divisions to be part of tourism. And as you mentioned sports. We've just lost the Rugby Sevens to Grenada. There are so many sporting events worldwide where we could really take advantage of a sports tourism linkage because we have the facilities here. Other areas in the region are actually building the facilities to facilitate them, just as Grenada has just done. And the kind of marketing advantage of that is not just the fact the visitors, and when the Rugby Sevens started in Tobago, and when that was here, first of all, a very heavy drinker rugby players, and they eat a lot, so they were very good business across Tobago, but also the spectators that come, but also it's a massive coverage by people that follow sport and follow rugby. So that linkage between sport, the linkage in agriculture, people will know that we had a travel foundation program in Tobago where we tried to facilitate agriculture. We used to have an adopt a farmer program. It worked very well until the numbers fell off the cliff and we had not enough people to make it worthwhile in terms of visitors. So the different hotels would adopt a farming cooperative and they would supply directly. It was working very well. We had things like teaching school children to grow herbs in the schools and how they would sell them and invoice them and all of that. That was working very well. We actually won awards for that. So there are so many things we did craft. We taught some single mothers how to sew and to improve their crafts. One of the problems you have with the craft industry is not the crafts themselves, but how they present them, how they box them and present them. They were not able to ask enough money for them because they didn't present them in a way that made them look valuable. So that cross division is everything. It's health, it's sport, it's tourism, agriculture, all of the divisions, and that they should all have an input into the tourism budget. Tourism police, yes, we need a safe island for it to be a tourism-friendly place, but we also need a safe island for us to continue living here. The tourism police was a very good idea. It actually gave us, again, very good marketing and publicity. We had a lot of people, visitors, commenting on it. The police were very good. The chamber and ourselves went through hoops to get them kitted out in bicycles and uniforms. But that is something that really needs to be focused on because that was a very good thing for us and for the tourists. And energy, the green thrust in the budget was welcome. Again, Travel Foundation did a lot of work on this with Virgin Holidays. We did a switch off, save big kind of campaign, a number of issues. The problem from the industry point of view, even though it is actually becoming an imperative, it's something that everybody is now asking for, they're actually not prepared to pay more for it. It's one of these catch-22 things. It's not even 5% difference what they're prepared to pay. So, but it is critically important that we tick those boxes when tourists are looking for a destination, that we have these green initiatives, not only to attract tourists, but for us to maintain a beautiful island. So that is very important. As I say, I saw that tourism agency, the request is 75 million. I'm concerned it's not enough, but I will probably leave it there because I think we can have more questions on this later. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well thought out presentation. And so that I would not take away from the time of the other presenter, I want to introduce Ms. Diane Haddad. Diane is Tobagonian, born, bred Tobagonian. I want everybody to remember that and know that. You know, I am proud to know that she is Tobagonian too. Diane is the president of the Tobago Chamber Commerce And she has been very vocal on the stage on Tobago issues, and I thought that is wise that we have her present. And the only lady on the table, you remember that? We need some more next year, all right? So Diane, the mic is yours.
Thank you, Brendan. Good morning, everyone. Good morning to whoever is viewing virtually and to all the fellow panelists. Let me say that the budget represented a new beginning. The entire presentation spoke to a newness. It spoke to hope. The presentation was very detailed. We thought that the representation, finally, in terms of justifying why we should get what is asked for me being on the other side of the negotiating table, I cannot understand why it will not be given. And I'm saying that because of the detail that went into explaining why it must be given and what was the need for it. So although the budget was long, in terms, it was simple enough for you to understand, and it was detailed enough, keeping your interest, because everything in it was relative and relevant to persons who have been, let me say, traumatized for a number of years in terms of how we were moving forward. For the business community, I know that there's a lot of apathy. There's been helplessness and hopelessness for many years. And I do not even know at this stage how many persons can survive this. But I firstly want to ask you not to give up. Regardless of what, let us not give up. Giving up is not going to get any one of us anywhere. In presenting the budget, it was very holistic. I would have said it before. It clearly, for me, showed that somebody did a lot of reading. I'm not sure if it was Mr. Richards. But a lot of reading in terms of the documentation and minutes and notes that were in those offices. And I'm saying that because I'm certain persons from the Hotel Association and Chamber and many others would recognize that a number of those initiatives and ideas were for years that we would have done contributions in different meetings, many great plans and ideas that we had, and many times that our hopes were raised and trashed again. So what it was bringing back to life of all of the ideas. I want to apologize to Mr. Charles on my left, as I would have announced publicly that my understanding of the Tobago Development Bank idea was since the interaction with Dr. London, not recognizing that it's as far back as Mr. Hotroy Charles, as I would have just understood. And I want to say that that makes it even worse. We are here going along, plodding for years with all of these brilliant ideas, and the ideas are stunted because we are not mobilizing them into action. And that is one of, Mr. Richards said it over and over for the morning, Tobago's issues. Instead of developing the human capital was literally smothered. And now the administration that sits before us today has quite a job, which is to change the mindset in terms of us getting the culture or behavior change and applying oneself, and these are now all individual decisions, everybody participating in individual decision making for change. And that change, we cannot change the village and the child and the family if everybody's not going to make a change, because the child is in the home of a family and the families are all part of the villages. So unless that decision is taken there and we are going to apply ourselves differently, I know that this is going to be quite a challenge to the administration. However, each one of us have a role to play, and we're going to have to be our neighbor's keeper through this. The low productivity clearly is an issue. We are speaking about it. In the past, we would have heard politicians speak, well, you know, I have an election to win. I do not know how strong these politicians are today that will say, in spite of, I have a people to bring change to, and therefore I'm prepared to take that risk. Once persons understand that you're serious and that you are mobilizing in a direction that will bring change to them in a meaningful, deep way, they will bide that time. Unfortunately, we do have a situation where numbers of persons have benefited through programs or participating in things that are under the table and corrupt and don't bear any fruit to our island, but selfishly to them only. And therefore, all of that needs to change. So what a job you all have to do. And I don't want to say you all alone, because I did tell the chief that I'm tired working for free and seeing no results. And he did tell me, well, you never worked for me for free yet. So let me say that all of the things, I mean, this is the most, I have not even heard of Trinidad and Tobago budget so holistic and deep. This really had some time spent in it. And if I were to say, I was observing you for the 6 months, and getting a little concerned that nothing was happening. So if this is what you were doing for the 6 months in terms of really pulling together what needed to happen, then you're forgiven for that. But the depth of it in terms of the education, the sporting, and the tourism, the housing, the digitization, the agriculture, understanding what needed to take place, the Caribbean Airlines, the port, the airport, in order to bring the whole together, I really felt good for once in a good long time in terms of us understanding what change is really. Now, Chris spoke of the concern of recurrent expenditure. A good transition takes about 10 years. And I want to say that again. A good transition, listen to this, people of Tobago, takes about 10 years. So do not look for a magic wand, because in that transition, you have to ease persons over while you grow new ones. That is not going to happen overnight. So if we look for that, forget it, you are going to get frustrated. So the recurrent expenditure, acceptably this rounds, if we can put all of this together, which is in my handwriting, having sat and listened to it, if we are going to do it, the recurrent expenditure becomes justified in terms of the scale moving, so that next year we should see a little shift, and the following year another shift. Now, that will make a big difference. The recurrent expenditure can actually stay there. If the rest of the island is growing and developing, then you actually need more public service support in order to carry it. So if you have more investment taking place and more development on the island, then frankly speaking, your population is going to grow and your public service requirement can necessarily stay. So we need to understand it. However, we will be observing, so the licks will come if we see that figure staying there, but we're not seeing the rest on the documents happening. The development also took place in terms of the ideas for around the entire island. It was not one-sided or focused in any particular direction, but it is a lot. So whilst we hear of this big picture, which is what we are all pleased to hear about and to see, because we can imagine it with you, we were a very integral part of all of these ideas. Digitization is as good as the people. And I am going to say that until the cows come home. I remember learning the first thing in the computer course, garbage in, garbage out. And that has not changed up until today. And if the computer systems we have, man does not manage it, you can do what you want, you are going to have corrupt data. And if people don't activate it in a timely manner, you are not going to get results. So I'm calling on us again, not to just speak to digitization, but to understand that for the answer to be at 8:05 in the morning is because we needed to be at our desks for 7:45, accounting to reporting for work, and starting at 8 a.m. And those are the things that are going to make the difference. And we have to be there paying attention to what's on the computer and not assuming that the robot in the machine is going to answer like Siri. So those things for me, in terms of where we are going, are crucial. We spoke about the government program for $600,000, that's whatever. It's a waste of time. If you are going to give a business, first to begin with $600,000, you have to determine the activity of the business and whether 600,000, it starts from 75, it stops at 6. After 2 years of suffering and hungry, I don't know what $75,000 can do. Neither, in terms of the turnover and the ratio for what they use for 600,000, it's not applicable. Let's go beyond that. You are being audited. And then you are being told that out of the 600,000, and I'm using the largest figure just for you to get an idea of, imagine the man with the 75,000. You are being audited and then you are being told that you have to pay all of those back figures. So out of the 600,000, you're now going to have to pay penalties. Let's say it's NIS, and so you have to pay the penalties. So the NIS payment is probably 50, 75,000, but the penalties total another 200,000. So out of your 600,000, nearly 300 goes to NIS for paying backlog or whatever. So for those programs to work under the conditions, and I'm only saying that because the business community has to recognize that they have a role to play in terms of running business as business. And I sit saying it because sometimes I'm embarrassed when people come and hit me. Well, you know, you need to shut up sometimes because some of the people you represent don't exactly do the right thing. But I speak for myself and for the ones who actually do the right thing. That aspect of it has to be looked at as to whether the National Insurance Board, who equally is in trouble based on all what's out there, needs to say at this stage that they are going to go on a drive where people are allowed to come in and sit and go through your documents and get it up to date on a program of payment over the next 5 to 7 years. So work with the country. Let this country have this movement of moving together to correct the wrong. Right? And they also have to agree that those penalties, which they cannot put in their books as collectibles, let's forgive it for now and let's move on and let's correct the wrong. Our country has to go through a serious program of forgiveness. And that goes for the human beings as well. If we are not prepared to go there, we will never fix this. We're going to be talking and trying to put plasters on top of ugly sores while the foot is rotting under. It makes no sense. So let us work through that. So that program, Mr. Richards, is not doing what it's supposed to do. So after needing 600,000, which is the max you could get, they take away 300, your business still in jeopardy. So I will share with you, don't take money from the bank unless it's going to fix your problem. It's better you stay with the problem and pray and find another way out. But don't take money if it's going to create a bigger problem. And that's where you have to stand your ground. It must make sense to what you are going to do. The other aspect is when these programs are put in place for us, the business community. Most important is that when you have a moratorium, you know, a lot of us like the free ride. So for the free time, we don't actually execute the plan according to the clock and to the data and to all the promises we make. And we only recognize after the 18 months of the moratorium, oops, I have a payment to make, and oh, now I can't make it. And therefore, this is really about learning to re-strategize and manage our businesses, not just us representing programs and bailouts or whatever. And I'll tell you why I feel obligated at times to represent some of those programs. One, the Tobago business community, at best, and with the best interests in their hearts, never got the opportunity to do business. That's number one, and I'm speaking about that, and I'm talking about the real business. I'm not speaking about people who live on THA contracts I am not, and I'm saying it boldly, I am not speaking about those persons who have a business that just feeds off of tax dollars. I'm speaking about persons who go every morning and turn their keys in doors and sit and work or walk and work or lift and work or do whatever it takes for them to actually make bread and butter. And they've never been given that opportunity in a meaningful way to show their true potentials and to actually develop their businesses and see where it would have taken their dreams. A number of them now are of the age where they're probably weaker and not able to put that energy out. What is their position? So we have a gap in the knowledge which already resides in those persons. And this youth that we speak about, that we are now going to try to harness and grow, because there's a big gap between the two. How are we going to merge that? So what's in here, I'm sorry to say, never flushes out here very well. Never does. And you can't pay for it either. So I am saying to the THA that whilst we have all these beautiful plans, the administration in charge, please understand that one of your major issues is going to be that intellect that puts in there to carry out the delivery. And I have to say that we are seeing a gaping hole there already. So with the best intentions, I want us to understand that we have been speaking about human capital development for years again. Human capital can only be developed at this stage in the quickest way, not only through the school system. The school system itself is going to take a 10-year process. It's not going to happen overnight. You have to recondition your teachers. You have to recondition the curriculum. You have to recondition the environments. You have to recondition all of that to bring it through that aspect. And therefore, it is going to be necessary to merge those heads that have all that know-how in it to the persons who have the paper that is whatever age and thinks that I know it all because I went through university and I am now certified. Major disconnect, and I urge you all to look at that, Mr. Richards. So, without us looking at all of those deep concerns, well-written, well-intentioned, and if we are going to say we want autonomy, we want a bigger share of what's our entitlement, and Tobago is going to collect its allocation of revenue, then we have to structure it in such a way that the business community is able to do good business so that they are able to generate the revenue, pay their taxes on the island of Tobago, and that becomes part of your bottom line for your justification for spend and for further development. So thank you very much. I hope I have brought some light to where we are going, but my conversation is very wide and deep. It's the deep, we miss the depth. And there must be a measure of forgiveness in this time, and I'm only saying that because of the pandemic 2 years. People really have hurt through that period, and I don't know that people understand how badly that was, and I have recognized it in speaking with the bankers. They are clueless as to how far the licks went. So we need that conversation to continue in terms of the depth. Again, thank you very much, and I hope I have brought some measure of light to the conversation.
Thank you. You surely did. You surely did. Thank you, Ms. Diane Haddad, the President of the Tobago Chamber of Commerce.
That's the chairman of the Tobago Division of the Trinidad and Tobago Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Not that I wanted it to be longer, but when you call me president, other people may get upset. So please.
Okay, so you're chairman. Okay. Correction requested. And today, and now we have one of the first chairman, the first chief secretary of the Tobago House of Assembly, and ardent and direct, true Tobagonian, he called himself, true patriot, Mr. Hochoy Charles.
Still in the morning. Good morning, everyone. And I'm going to be slightly different. I can't say that the light is damaging me, but I want to join with all of you and thank all the others who panelists. And I listened attentively. Well, in fact, I did not hear the budget at all because of something that happened. There was a serious challenge. But I got a copy of it and then looked at it, read it through, and so on. And I've listened to the presentation before this morning. And all I want to say to us, we can't have an economic problem, a socio-economic problem, and apply a political solution to it. We have a problem. And the budget, we can now all see, and I'm sure Diane said it, that it was comprehensive. We can all see very good speech, very good statement. Then the question will arise, what do we do next? There's where I am. You listen to Diane, you listen to even Mr. Richard, and he did see that some of the information that was in that budget was work done in the past. And I want to congratulate the man who was on my left there, James, Dr. Vannas James, for doing a lot of work during the last 1998 to 2000 to have all that work done. Let me begin my presentation now by saying to you that deception is what keeps us in bondage. But the truth is what will set you free. Deception is what keeps us in bondage, and we have been there for a long time. But truth is what will set us free. You cannot build a superstructure without first having a foundation, and a good foundation at that, or else that superstructure will collapse on you. Let me quote Marcus Garvey. I'm going to give Vannas all the time to talk. Let me quote Marcus Garvey. He said this: a people without the knowledge of their past history, their origin, or their culture is like a tree without roots. In my manual, and I'm paraphrasing the manual, which is my Bible, it says this, that one generation must communicate. You English teachers will say it's, but I say will communicate their work to the next generation, or that next generation will be lost. Will be lost. And this is where we have been for 20-something years. In fact, if I go back to the manual, you want to know, where is he going? If I go back to my manual, the beginning of the manual, the Holy Bible, I do nothing without it. It says this in Genesis 1, the beginning of the manual. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is verse 1 of chapter 1. And verse 2 says this, and the earth was formless and empty. That's the manual we use. That's the manual we must use. What God did after that, He knows. We pray to Him. He's everything. is that he started to put a structure. In fact, God put a structure in place. And at the end of it, the last day of putting the structure in place, he created man and put man to operate that structure. So without a structure, you can't function and perform. And there is where we are in the THA. We, the administration that went in the Tobago House of Assembly Act 1996 was created on the 10th of December, 1996. The Tobago House of Assembly that you now know is only 26 years old. And I'm sure that I'm going to take some questions on that. You believe it's 1980? That was something else. That wasn't the same structure we have. A new structure was created on the 10th of December, 1996, the one that we have operating. We were now putting it, that was the form. We were now putting it in place so that we could have been able to deliver to you, the people of Tobago and Trinidad and Tobago, what it says we should do, the fifth schedule. We had a new administration that took over before that structure was put in place. And for 21 years, nothing happened. You remember, development plan was written, 15-year development plan was written, and we started to put it in place. The managerial infrastructure to deliver even this budget is not in place. Even the budget that we hear today, there is no structure yet in place. The institutional structure is not yet in place to deliver. And people are going to be frustrated if we don't do that. There is where we are. So a structure must be put in place now in order to allow that to happen. It brings me now to this. We have to understand that the assembly has to operate within the framework of the laws of the country. Outside of that, you can't. And as you would know, the tool for the implementation of public policy is law. Public policy means government policy. It's law. That is the tool you use. If there is no law, you as assembly or as government cannot carry out the policy decision that you make. So we, all of us, you the public and the assembly, must know the laws. And one, it will be the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago. Two, especially, the Tobago House of Assembly Act, and three, the Civil Service Act. You must know them. And where we are now, we don't know them. We have a problem. We do not know them. So I do have a problem with the budget. Most of the things that you have heard in the budget, you would have heard it this morning too, are things that have been planned years ago. Nothing new in the budget except there were two items in it that I would not want to talk about in the public, except you ask a question, I will clarify. I will take the opportunity to have a conversation with the chief and his administration on those. I'm not going to be talking about, if you ask me, I will have to answer you today. But there are certain things in it that we would need to have clarified. They would not work. So where we are today, where we are now, where the administration is now, this is why I'm not commenting on the budget at all. Very fine speech, very fine, well put together documentation. All these ideas, they have been there a long time. We wrote a 15-year development plan, as I mentioned to you, and that development plan, as you know, we were not there to implement it. And what we recognize now, looking at this budget, is that this new administration, after 21 years, would have come into office, and I believe that is why Diane says that a lot of reading and a lot of research work would have been done. Those documentations were done. Those things were done. One of the architects is right down the left, he's to speak after me. We have done that kind of work. And this new administration that has come into office, we look at the budget and we recognize that they are now completing the work that is to be done. But what is missing is the institutional structure to allow that work to be done. And this is why I myself would want to assist Tobago in getting that job done. Final point. You can't do that, all this work, without having your power. And when I say power, I mean the ability and the capacity to influence or to control your own destiny. Let me repeat that slowly. The assembly requires the power to do the job which they say that they're going to do in the act. I'm not so sure that they have all that power. We're not going to discuss that now. If you ask me, I'll answer you where it's lacking. That power is your ability and your capacity to influence or to control your space, your destiny. And that is where autonomy or internal self-government becomes the key in all that we are doing. In all that you have in the document, because I'm seeing the document said, we're going to lobby cabinet, we're going to lobby this, we're going to lobby that. Let's assume that the lobby doesn't work. All that we promise you will not be able to be delivered. And that is why that is the key item, your power. That is where self-government becomes important. Very important and crucial to all that we need to do. Certain things you have started to plan already, as you recognize tongue and country planning. Tongue and country planning is one of them that, as you recognize, you can't plan to do anything in Tobago except somebody permits you. You can't build a building. Somebody in Trinidad has to give you permission to build. If you don't have that, you can't do it. You want to have a factory done in Tobago, you can't do it because you don't have a permission to use this spot. The whole of Tobago may be decided, and that's why your power is so crucial. That's why self-government is one of the most critical items. You see why I said that I want it to be very short. If you want to make Tobago, as is said in the budget, the greatest little island on the planet, and the smarter, greener, and more autonomous Tobago, those are the crucial things that we need to fix. You need to fix that matter of your power, your self-government, or your autonomy issue. And finally, as I wrap, I want to say to you, all of us, whenever a government is put in office, and I'm not talking party, whenever a government is put in office, is the only one you have. You don't have two. Forget the party that forms the government. Every citizen in that country must work to make sure that government succeeds. Because if the government fails, the country fails. Forget the party. And that is where all of us should be. And I am prepared, we are prepared to work. I tell you, I'm going to be different and brief. And if you notice what I give you, we are to put the institutional structure in place in order to do the delivery of what we say in the budget. And I want to warn and caution my good friend, the institutions are not yet in place to deliver that budget. We're going to help you to do it. Vanas, myself, and I could call the names in public, Vanas, myself, and Alan, which as if they have us on their side to do the work with them. The work has been done, all the kind of trouble that we have got from Trinidad, we have gone through that channel. We have gone through that. I see people trying to reinvent the wheel. And I'm sure that questions are going to be raised, especially when we talk about the 6.9%. I wanted to wrap up. The 6.9%. I put a government someplace. It wasn't simple. One of the architects that was on that commission is the man who's going to be talking after me afterwards. We prepared a case. And I want to say this, that what is required to be done now is that there must be some work being done now in order. Because I imagine the question, you have to read the mind of your competitor or your enemy or the person who you're going to be meeting to discuss. Read his mind. What is he going to say? How are you going to justify the 6.9%? If you ask me the question today, I'm going to share with them the answer because it was raised already and we dealt with it. I'm going to tell them how to do that. How to do that so that they would be able to make the persons who are about to ask you that, whether it's in the cabinet or the Minister of Finance himself, very silent. And as Diane says, make it impossible for them to refuse to give you what was recommending and what the Parliament agreed to, 6.9% of the national budget. Let me thank you all very much.
Thank you, Brother Charles. Inspiring, isn't it? Let's give him a round of applause again, please. I think it was very inspiring. Yeah, very simple, but very inspiring. Thank you again. And now we come to our final panelist, and we all know him as Dr. Vanis James, world-renowned economist. I wonder if I could speak. He tell you more about that. Doc, you are online.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Brendan. And I speak aware that...
Do that. Give it a turkey neck. Right.
Right. That sounds good now. I speak aware that we have the bulk of the audience in virtual space and a small portion here in our physical space. And I want to be clear and complimentary to the other four panelists who spoke before me. And in particular, I want to build on what Anselm said, and especially on those last 2 points that Ho Choi ended on. Everything going forward will be about autonomy and a collective national effort to help the government here to succeed. And I think my best contribution to the conversation would be to do what economists normally do. And that is clarify how we should budget in a space like Tobago in the light of the particular problems we have and the goals we set. Economists think about an economic budget, a budget for a country or an island like Tobago, as an internally consistent specification of revenues, expenditures, projects, and policies, and read that to mean laws, aimed at solving specific problems and achieving specific goals, and especially in Tobago's case, development and growth goals. I might ad-lib a little bit to say that this budget did not have the luxury of the opportunity to specify an appropriate development or growth goal guide its budgeting, perhaps because of the time that it had to work with to get the budget ready. But my best contribution is to help you to look at the data provided in the budget in a way that would allow us to get a reasonably sound specification of the economic problems that Tobago has to confront with the THA budget. Now, I want to remind everybody that the Tobago we are talking about in this budget is the Tobago specified in the THA Act of 1996. That's the 6 nautical mile boundary Tobago. Not my Tobago, which is the median line Tobago, which owns all the space going all the way up to Barbados. That's not the Tobago we're talking about. The data for that Tobago would look very differently to the data for the Tobago that the law specifies and that this THA so far has to work with. But according to the Division of Finance, and I use that as short for Division of Finance, Trade, and the Economy, the Tobago economy produced about $1.68 billion in 2021. That's in the budget that Chief Secretary Farley presented. And in that same budget, it's also documented that the THA routinely spends about $2.3 billion annually. So you see where that gets you right away. The THA spends 37% more than Tobago as a whole produces in a year. Now, if that doesn't tell you you're working with crisis, nothing else will. And there's more to that. Add another $1 billion to that for central government services, and that gets you to the frightening picture that government in Tobago spends approximately twice the output of the economy. Government alone. We're not talking about the private sector, consumption and investment. And we're not even talking about exports, foreigners spending on our economy. This is just the government spending twice what we produce. So you have to ask yourself, well, what are we doing here? This is about living way above our means. And that is the definition of a failed economy. The budget also indicates to us that government itself produces $806 million, that's the 48% that Mr. Richards' data indicates, $806 million annually. So Tobago is clearly not getting value for money in the accounting meaning of that expression as it runs government in Tobago. And that's not surprising. And it's not surprising because the data provided by the budget team also indicate that $2 billion of the budget is used to support its establishment, what they call recurrent spending. And only $300 million goes to finance structural change, and that's notional finance, because a large chunk of what is called development spending, traditionally for the last 21 years, hasn't really been about development at all. So it's budgeted for development, even if it does not generate development effects, and you have to care a lot about that. You could spend a lot of money and call it development spending, without generating development if you're not tackling the fundamental problems identified in the statements I'll be making going down the road. So what really that tells you is that the structure of THA spending to date is not designed to build productive capacity in Tobago to date. The economy, according to the DOF, generated about $219 million of tax revenues in 2021. That is about 9% of THA expenditures and 13% of the GDP of Tobago. And even if you double that figure to account for national collection of Tobago's revenues, it still leaves the Tobago economy able to rely on tax revenues to finance only 19% of typical THA expenditures. That's the definition of a dependent economy. Tobago's economy depends on Trinidad's economy to finance its government. Its government, which explains that we are in the same situation we were in 1889 when the British saddled Trinidad with the Tobago problem. Now, if you add the other $1 billion of government expenditure, the tax revenues of the Tobago economy, even when you account for Trinidad's collection, can only finance 13% of government services delivered here. In other words, we have to worry about policing ourselves, we have to worry about the courts, public administration generally, apart from all the services the THA provides. And when you think of government in this holistic sense, in this fuller sense, Tobago would be in a position where it could not finance it, left to its own devices. That's a situation of crisis. And I point them out to you because I want you to be aware of how serious we must take this agenda of budgeting for Tobago and budgeting for its development. This is a failed economy we're talking about. It failed in 1884, and it is still a failed economy today. Now, a big signal of the fundamental problems that we have to tackle in budgeting in Tobago comes from the data provided by the budget team and the CSO, which is that about 54% of the workers of Tobago work for government. That's about 16,700 persons. And that's a conservative estimate, because remember, many institutions in Tobago are highly dependent on government for financing. So you have to count those in a satellite environment in order to get a full figure. Tobago is much more dependent for employment on government than the 54% signals. But if you just work with that figure and be very conservative, take the ratio of the 48% to that 54%, and what you get is a measure of how productive government is in Tobago compared to the whole economy. The answer to that ratio is 88%, which means government in Tobago is a hotbed of low productivity. That's a problem for development. Development tackles that problem. Government is the centerpiece of the fundamental development problem Tobago has. It's a millstone around the necks of Tobagonians when you look at it through the lens of productivity. It's where our hopes and dreams are. But if we want to be thoughtful, we would recognize that fact. And as bad as government is, when you listen to a lot of the talk in Tobago about agriculture and food security and so on, agriculture is worse than government. although much of it is part of the private sector. The private agricultural sector performs pretty much worse than government. So you can't pass your mouth on public servants if you're working in the agricultural sector. The data from the team in the budget on agriculture says that the agricultural sector of Tobago produces only a minuscule, let me change that adverb and call it paltry, $18 million worth of output. Now that would make my father cry in his grave. $18 million. What are we doing? That's 1.1% of Tobago's $1.68 billion. Remember, this conversation is not a conversation for Mr. Richards and the Chief Secretary. Tobago is owned by Tobagonians, and we must take responsibility. It's our budget. It's not Farley's budget. This is the budget of the people of Tobago put forward to deal with our problems. And when we confront those problems this way, what we see is that agriculture is producing 1.1% of the budget, but it is employing about 800 persons doing that, 2.5% of our labor force. And when you take the ratio of those two numbers, you get 44%, which tells you that the agricultural sector is generating productivity about 44% of the productivity of the economy as a whole, worse than what government is doing. In fact, half, pretty much exactly half, of how government is performing. So when you are talking about developing Tobago, you have a massive problem in the agricultural sector and in government. That's half your economy right there. That's the den of iniquity in the form of low productivity you, the people of Tobago, must address if you want to go anywhere in the direction of being a self-reliant island. So, what all of those data tell you when you put them all together? Tobago critically lacks the internal capacity to generate the savings rate it needs in order to finance its own development. So we are lucky to be in a position, because we're part of the nation of Trinidad and Tobago, to rely for the next round or two rounds on transfers from Port of Spain to get our development process started. And I say lucky to remind Tobagonians that although we are the ones talking about democratizing the country and potentially even seceding if Trinidad doesn't listen, it is an option for Trinidad to secede from Tobago, and that's when you'll have trouble. Government must bear in mind, and in the effort to transform Tobago, we must bear in mind that when we consider the relatively high wage rates government can afford to pay to employ people, to employ that 54%, low productivity government and low productivity agriculture are major constraints on the development of the private sector. And we have to remember that given that government is a den of low productivity, we have as Tobagonians to rely primarily on development in the private sector to fix this problem. You don't fix productivity problems by going into the center where the productivity difficulty is, and dealing with it there. You have to build new economic activity that's more productive than agriculture and government. That's the private sector primarily. So the central theme in the budget should be about how we invest in government to stimulate private sector development. And I have to say that when I read the document, that preoccupation doesn't scream at me I know it's there. I know the guys who did the work. I know the chief secretary, so I know it's in the head. But the budget is a consistent set of policies aimed at specific goals. And that goal has to be front and center. Every project you put money to, you must screen it to ask what effect will it have on private sector development. No exception in this crisis situation we are in here. Now, what all of that means in technical terms when you're setting up to do the budget is that Tobago lacks internal capacity to save to pay its way, that's one. All of that also means Tobago lacks internal capacity to produce and export the types of goods and services we need in order to pay for the imports we rely on. So when the government says Tobago is a tourism-driven economy, nothing no go so. I'm a Charlottesville man. I could tell Farley that, and I could tell Ansem that. That's not the Tobago you're watching. The Tobago you're watching is a government-driven economy. And if it was a tourism-driven economy, tourism would be the one we would all be talking about accounting for 30-35% of our GDP. That's not what their data is showing. That's not what our data is showing us. Tobago is not a tourism-driven economy. It's a government-driven, government-powered economy. And it's a government-driven, government-powered failed economy. If we want to develop a tourism economy, there are things we have to do along the lines of what Chris James has been talking about, and other people. But we don't have it yet. So we have to confront it and design projects to get it. It also tells us something Hocho is pointing to, that the state of Tobago is such that it lacks the capacity to upgrade its own institutions with particular reference to the rule of law, the regulatory environment, and the business environment. We can't really upgrade those institutions the way we should because of the absence of autonomy. Remember the way the courts even read the law. If you don't make policy the government wants you to make, it could intervene and block you. The reason autonomy is important is people in Trinidad don't care about the things we are talking about. They don't even know about them. They have never read the data the way we're reading it here this morning. And even if you write it in the budget statement you send down there, I don't know if they have the capacity to put the data together this way. We will have to know the data this way as Tobagonians, and we will have to care about the institutional adjustments we have to make. And once you begin to talk about them in ways that Trinidad doesn't understand, you have a fight. That's the substance of the meaning of autonomy. You get to make them without having to ask Port of Spain for permission, please. And all of that goes to two additional important deficits that we have here. We lack the capacity in Tobago to defend ourselves against imported inflation. That's the kind of economy I'm describing. And we also lack the important capacity we need to ensure food security that Mr. Richards mentioned. Remember what food security is. It is the ability to secure access by all members of society, rich and poor, to sufficient food of appropriate variety and nutrition at affordable prices. That's what economists mean when they put the language food security into the literature. And you don't get that even by developing agriculture. The centerpiece of food security all over the world is the ability to export sufficient to pay for imports of anything you want, food, computer, whatever you want. So I put that into the discussion to remind Tobagonians, talk about food security is not a dream in the middle of the night. You get it done by building the capacity to export, especially in Tobago's case, transforming our tourism sector so we could export goods, we could export services and some goods cross-border. Send it to get people to come here for different reasons than sea, sun, and sand. All of that points you to critical underpinnings for a development thrust. And then only give me 2 more minutes to tell you about them. The most important of those development thrusts will be about putting in place in Tobago a proper set of procedures for budgeting. This government didn't inherit that set of procedures. It is going to need to put them in place itself. Because after 21 years, they were destroyed. But once you put them in place, we will have to pay close attention to the development, the creation of a special project to go after autonomy. Tobago has to treat autonomy as a development project. And we have to put money behind it, just like any other form of development initiative. We have to say we're going to put $100 million to win our autonomy, or whatever the amount of money we decide on. And we have to calculate the gains we make from it in terms of economic effects, rates of return, and so on, just like any other project. It's a critical part of our institutional development. Permit me, Mr. Chairman, to make one more point. And that is that when Hochar was talking about the development banking, and Anselm mentioned it, they were onto something that's important. If you want government spending to stimulate private investment in Tobago, which is the critical thing that it has to do, that private investment has to be financed at concessional rates. Commercial banking rates won't do the job. And commercial banks won't lend you money at 2 and 3% to pursue Tobago's development. They're in this business to make their own money. So you've got to put together an innovative financing facility in Tobago. And its centerpiece, the centerpiece of the innovative aspect of the innovative financing facility must be its investment, its support for investment in producing 4 critical types of services that would transform tourism. Exportable education, exportable healthcare, exportable creative industry output like Rose and Nelson and them used to be able to produce, and exportable services from our housing stock, meaning housing stock to facilitate the delivery of tourism services going forward. And it is innovative financing in the sense of those new applications, not development banking for agriculture. That is the sense of innovative financing. Not the new sources, it could even be the old sources, but it's the new applications that will make the difference to our development going down the road. There are other things that would matter for successful development budgeting and development planning in Tobago, and we will try to bring them out, pretty much continuing the work we've done over the last 21 years when we didn't have a chance to spend the money won in the context of our pursuit of the Dispute Resolution Commission case. This time round, we're going to have to win money by going back to Parliament for autonomy. Thanks a lot, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Dr. James. I think we need to give him another
Yeah,
round of applause. Well said. You know, we have the questions and answer time. I have before me a barrage of questions coming in online from YouTube, from Facebook. So I will post the first one. It's asked here, the person didn't give a name. It's what plans are there for improving tertiary education on the island? Dr. James, would you want to take that, or Mr. Charles?
Well, if I may, I don't want to preempt Anselm's answer, but he gave a part of the answer in the budget itself. They listed 7 projects to be financed in the current year. Improvements to primary schools, improvement to secondary schools, Mason Hall government upgrade, school for the deaf, childhood centers, the vocational facility in Roxborough, and Scarborough Sec, reconstruction work, and so on. Now, all of these things are important things, but we're going to need to change our conception of the education investments we're going to do. They didn't have time to do that work. That work will be done in the framework of the development plan. And the focus of it must be on coming to grips with what is really wrong with the Tobago education system and the national one. And that what is really wrong is that we have a school system that teaches people about things. Business people like Chris know and Diane know. When you hire workers, you hire them to be able to do things. And you have to educate people with a track in the education system that builds capacity to do things. That is expensive. In places like Germany, that's where your apprenticeships and so on come to the fore. In Finland, you have 2 tracks. You have this famous academic track that we know, but you have a skill-intensive track, and the 2 meet at the tertiary level. That skill-intensive track is the learning by doing track. That's where sports people learn to do sports, cricketers learn to play cricket. That's where people who study English learn communication skills, information sharing skills, and so it covers the whole spectrum of the education system, and you really have to build it in deliberately with high-quality teachers and high-quality curricula and self-confidence building processes that produce students who know how to do. I learned about mathematics when I went to school in Trinidad and Tobago, including UW. I learned to do mathematics when I went to school in Auburn University and Hofstra in the US. That's the point that's what we're going to have to tackle to deal with education properly.
But Brendan, there's just one other thing. We also have to give the kudos to those skills rather than the doing sector. We need to give that sector the kudos, because there's all this pressure to be academically bright and very little kudos given to these people that have skills that we all need. We need electricians, we need plumbers, we need masons. And we've got to start raising the kudos of those people.
Well said, well said. Anyone from the floor? We want to take 1 or 2 from the floor. I wanted to give Mr. Richards time for responding, but our time is now 12 o'clock, and we really say we were gone from 10 to 12. I don't know if our service provider will continue fine. He said we will continue. Thank you very much for the extra time. So, Mr. Richard, do you want some time to respond? Take the questions. Okay, so anyone from the audience would like to ask a question? If not, I'll go to our Facebook. Ms. Shirley Cook.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Shirley Cook. Dr. Vannis James, with respect to what you just said, the budget and the Chief Secretary indicated recently about raising the minimum wage of the URP and CPEP. And what you just said resonated with me in this way, that even though those salaries are raised, in order to develop what we want, the private sector, I think there ought to be a program that link those persons to the private sector. So that's in the doing. And in addition to the doing, we also need to engage persons in critical thinking even while they're doing, so we could build that capacity among our people. What do you think about that?
Yeah, and I think it is right to say that the Chief Secretary did say, and therefore Mr. Richards would have inspired him to say, that the budget embarks on the transformation and modernization of our education system. Along the lines you are identifying there, the government articulated in the budget a commitment to raising two critical forms of wage payments, CPEP payments and URP payments. They plan to almost double the amount of money they're spending on those. And I think you're heading down the right direction when you start to think about, well, if we're going to spend our money on those people, we have to repurpose what they're going to be doing in the economy. We can't simply be spending the money and guaranteeing them a higher standard of living for a low productive activity going forward. So we have to reform CPEP and URP to get value for money from them in Tobago, whatever they're doing in Trinidad. And a part of it will have to be to deploy them wisely, train them to make sure they could do things and do things efficiently, and then redeploy them, even if it's subsidized and sponsored by government, towards support for the development of private sector activity. But that's a long story that has to be worked out properly in consultation with all the relevant stakeholders, including CPEP and URP workers too. So it's not going to be easy to do any of these reforms Anselm is talking about in this budget if you not get the people at Tobago to buy in. We're going to have to put that system in place to engage the public properly, and not to engage the public in the old-fashioned way we do it, with the executive branch going out there and telling people, well, this is what we want to do. Do you agree? That's not the way it's going to be. You're going to get it to work. You're going to have to change that and come up with better ways to get the public to take responsibility for the reforms that will get Tobago on the right road. And you have to tell them, well, it's your Tobago. All of you can't just be eating money and Tobago ain't going nowhere. And let you the CPEP worker, take responsibility for Tobago too. So you have to set up the system to allow for that. So, but you're on the right track there.
He's completely on the right track.
Let me just add that in terms of the proposed salary increases for the CPEP and URP workers, who are probably the most vulnerable among us, there's also an arrangement that is being built out to ensure that there's a serious retooling and re-education component in terms of the new format for the CPEP and URP divisions of the THA. So it's not just this salary increase that is really the headline news, but behind the scene, there's a whole build-out of a new approach to CPEP and a new approach to URP that's going to be skill-intensive, going to be informed by training, going to look at the sectors of the economy that is looking for labor and ensure that those workers are prepared to take up those jobs. Because definitely one of the strategy of this administration is really to transition workers from the THA into the private sector. So that's serious part of the new arrangement for this organization. In addition to that, we are thinking about building out a training arrangement in the Cove area where we can provide, for instance, if a company is coming to set up in Cove and they need specific skills to drive their operation, we are building the capacity within the industry, within Cove to do the training for that company. So when they establish, Tobagonians will have the necessary skills to be employed in that activity of that company.
I just want to ask something as I have Mr. Richards there. As we speak of Cove, the initial intention of Cove was supposed to be green. You know, it was supposed to be a green industrial estate. We have gone way off the track with that. Is there any thoughts in terms of how do we redesign or realign that entire project? Or are we leaving the horses running the races as is?
Well, I don't know to what extent Cove is not green. Because if you go to Cove now, Cove is green. And the industries that are there are very light manufacturing industry. That maintains is an eco-industrial park. I think Cove had not been populated at the rate it should have been populated in terms of bringing in that kind of manufacturing component of the Tobago economy. We are looking at that. The new board of directors for Cove was given a new mandate to look at Cove differently and to see how we can do some upticking in terms of the population and getting some activities going there. There are some interesting development taking place at Cove. One, there is an animation center that is being established in collaboration with the University of Trinidad and Tobago, UTT. That is going to provide a new kind of opportunity for young Tobagonians who are getting into that space, animation. So that will provide some capacity there in terms of how we can expose young Tobagonians to that kind of development. There's also some movement from Angostura to do some kind of distilling activity at Cove. So there are some things that are happening but needs to be cleaned up before they are more in the public domain. But things are happening.
Okay. We have some questions from streaming friends. History has also shown that Tobago has never received the totality of its requests to central government. What is the expected shortfall, and what measures have been factored into the budget to supplement this outside would outside borrowing be considered?
The THA, this year budget is not a wish list. It was anchored in science. We calculated what the national budget is likely to be, because that is what our revenue is predicated against. And we applied the dispute resolution recommendation of 6.9%. So we are not just pulling a number out of the sky. We did the work, we did the calculation, and we are saying this is what you are likely to present in terms of a national budget. We are entitled to between 4.03% and 6.9%. We are asking for 6.9% because we want to do all these things. And more than that, they have increased government in Tobago by 25% by changing the configuration of the Tobago House of Assembly from 12 to 15. That brings additional operational costs across the THA in terms you have expanded government. So we are not guessing the numbers. We have calculated the numbers. We have put the programs and projects to support the expenditure before the national community. And as Diane and others would say, I think it will be a great difficulty for the Prime Minister and his Minister of Finance to say no to the people of Tobago.
I also remember in Mr. Charles's discussion, indicated he has some ideas and probably he can share.
I just wanted to mention that that the 6.9%, as you know, is the maximum in that range. Tobago's development program, the economy of Tobago is not restricted or limited to the 6.9%, which is one element of Tobago's revenue to finance its expenditure. That is only the transfer coming from the Parliament, from the Consolidated Fund. is only one element of the money that Tobago should depend upon to develop the economy of Tobago. We are also, Tobago by law, and I hope that the action is actually taken on that too, we are also, based upon the very act that we have, the very act of 1996, we are entitled to loans, grants, we are entitled to returns on the investment that we make, and I mentioned 2 projects, even Studley Park Quarry. We mentioned the water project in Bloody Bay can bring Tobago the revenue that would exceed even what you're coming from as a transfer from Trinidad. The transfers coming from the consolidated fund is only one element of the money that Tobago should depend upon. And our budget in Tobago, our expenditure in Tobago is not restricted to that amount.
This is very, very interesting news, isn't it? Any more questions from the floor?
Hi, good morning. Hi, good morning. My thing is listening to the
What's your name, sir? Could you?
Mr. Andrews from Andy's company. So I'm into manufacturing, but my thing is that I'm looking at where we can industrialize Tobago in going forward. I'm hearing a lot of projects being talked about, but I'm looking at, we're already talking about the bank, competing with the banks as a project. So you're already trying to compete with the private sector if you're trying to do a Tobago Development Bank. So I'm sitting there and I'm saying to myself, okay, what else we could compete with? Could we compete with goods and services out of Tobago to Trinidad? So being a manufacturer, I would think that a lot of goods come to Tobago, but when they leave Tobago to go back down, all the vehicles go back down empty. So where could we capitalize on those things? And I think that TATCO, the board, that TATCO group, is one of the means that we could use. Maybe look at flour and sugar. If they could bring in those things direct to Tobago and even compete with the private sector in Trinidad, because they already, so we could look at all of that. I use maybe 100 bags of sugar a week if things are, so things like that. They bring in white sugar, they bring in brown sugar, and they sell it back. And they compete with the guys in Trinidad. I don't know if there's a policy for that. So those are the things I could look at coming out of Tobago. And there are so many things we could do. I don't have to bring a container, a 40-foot container to Tobago. I could land a 40-foot container to St. Vincent and sell it from Tobago, but to St. Vincent. So I could earn my US or foreign exchange, but land the container in St. Vincent to people who want goods and services out of Tobago, but the product don't have to come to Tobago. So there's so much ideas could happen if we kind of put the things together and look at revolutionizing Tobago and how we see Tobago from a manufacturing point of view.
Thank you.
Well, I think what he speaks of is something that would have been put on the table for quite some time, which is the opportunity for our ports to be developed where we do have access to get direct delivery into Tobago, and therefore that will facilitate the export. Because if you are not going to Trinidad, but want to go to St. Vincent or let's say Grenada or whatever, you still go to Trinidad in order to get there. So I think what you're speaking about would be the development of the ports in terms of our operations for customs, making them fully operational and not just what we have, which is a 3-month cycle of people coming doing the basics, barrels and so, and not necessarily dealing with a commercial aspect of it. And I think that is something too that we had on the table. We had done a lot of research on that and had handed in the interests in terms of companies willing to actually consolidate even the imports containers that our needs were here, and they had agreed, although they did have representation in Trinidad, that they will be willing to do that and send straight into Tobago. But of course, that's another document. Probably Anselm will find it somewhere along his search.
Thank you. Another question. The new tourist traveler today like to be entertained and be active. Tobago does not offer this. They need to develop Scarborough as a vibrant and interesting city before we can start talking about tourism. Is that a fact?
Tourism is changing day by day, and there are so many different elements that we need to embrace. To fill an aircraft, you need all of these niches. So yes, it would be great if we could develop Scarborough more beautifully, as was said. We certainly need things like duty-free shopping, but we also need to develop all the sites that we're talking about. We do need eco-tourism, we do need health tourism, we need diving, we need all of those different sectors. They all have a relatively small 5% activity rate within the region, but added up together, they can fill a plane, and that's what we need.
But Brendan, we have to be careful too not to lose what your experience is on an island. There are different tourists, and not every tourist comes to party, fet, get drunk, and fall over. So we need to be careful in terms of when we speak tourism. I am a tourist myself. My dream is to continue to travel the world. And I go to different places because you want to experience the culture of that place. You want to experience the story of that place. And I have a problem. I'll tell you something. I was driving to Chaguaramas yesterday, and I have to say that they're taking away my joy of going to the United States of America. Every design building we have in this country now, it's as though we just took a picture of one of the plazas in the United States on a strip. And our design, our frontage is the same thing for all our big stores, our big pharmacies. It actually looks like either CVS or Walmart. Come on, where are our architects in terms of developing our story? What is our picture going to look like? We are copycatting too much. So I want to say that we need to be able to give our tourists a Tobago experience. I remember part of the documents that we had wrote and suggested at the time was the Heritage Festival just being this month or whatever must not be that. The Saraka Feast must be something that's in the village that I can go to all year and enjoy what they do there. Whatever, it must be, the Lekoto stories must be there as a show, a theatrical. And as a tourist, I must be able to go there and see the show on a particular night, different stories. I don't know that we need to just have Heritage Festival for 2 weeks, ram, jam, bam, end up in a juve, everybody dirty and mud, drunk, and that's it. And then we're done again until next year. I think that that's how you develop the people into their artistic and creative skill. And therefore, the man or whoever is doing the dirt oven bread, those ladies, they are representing what that culture, what the story and the history behind it is. So I think that Tobago has to represent Tobago's story, and let us not get caught in going off course and giving me an experience of somebody else's country. Tourism now seems to be just do the strip with all the big hotels, all inclusive, I don't want to transfer me from here to there. Then I could just take a hotel right here and block off from everybody. So I want us to be careful that tourism has all the aspects. So we can decide we are having an element of sport tourism. We decide which sports we are going to attract here, and we professionalize them. We make them, monetize them in a big way in terms of us getting it done right. We host those people well. Those people will want to see. They don't want to come and see what they have at home. Health tourism, if that's what we're doing, then we need to do that well. So I want us to understand what this tourism thing is. It's not just copycat and taking a picture of what they and the artist draw that here and bring it, and we just have a template, please. I would be a first tourist to leave.
Let me just add something.
Anybody
Yes. Definitely, I think to get this tourism thing right, I think probably we need to really get a fundamental understanding of what constitutes tourism. I think in times gone by, I think a lot of people thought of tourism as airlift services and bringing plane.
Was what?
Airlift.
Airlift?
Yeah, airlift services, bringing planes and bringing...
No, but that's how you bring people.
No, I'm saying that some persons thought that that constituted tourism. That's the point I'm making, Diane. I'm saying that tourism is much more than that. And if we have a fundamental understanding that tourism is really the marketing and sale of a people, their culture, and their environment to the rest of the world, and then we can build our tourism product around that kind of understanding, then all the issues that you raise there, Diane, will fit neatly into that concept. Because it's about the people, it's about their history, It's about the environment and how you package that for sale to the rest of the world. That's what constitutes tourism. Yes, you need the infrastructure to bring the people here, which is airlift. But how do you configure the offering? Is by understanding what you are doing and understanding what you are offering to the rest of the world will give you the impetus to construct an offering that will whet the appetite of your visitors and leave them with an experience. Because what you are really selling in tourism is an experience of Tobago. And I think definitely we in Tobago have to look at what are our advantages, what are our natural advantages that we have. We have an island that is green. I think the Chief Secretary mentioned something about green visitors. We have just been awarded the UNESCO Man on the Biosphere status. How do we monetize that? Those are the kind, we have one of the oldest rainforests in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, but Anselm, let's look at Barbados.
I'm not speaking
If
to
you
Barbados, I'm
visited
speaking about Tobago.
No, I'm saying...
I'm saying what we should be doing here. I am not looking at Barbados. We have to have our... You spoke about the Tobago story. The Barbados story is not the Tobago story.
No, I'm only
Let
going
us
to
speak
give
about
you
our
an
story now.
example
Right, so...
of the caves. Previously, when you went there, you had to go through a whole... I mean, some people did not experience the caves because it was risky. They have invested money in it now where anybody can visit their caves. Anybody.
That's
what I'm speaking about. In terms of us professionalizing
what we
it
do.
and making that experience. But we can't take away from the fact that that's our natural resource. And therefore, we need to just make it accessible so even old people, wheelchair people, those people enjoy the caves. That the whole experience. That's what I'm speaking about. I'm not speaking about us. I'm talking Barbados.
Mr. Chairman, can I let me just bring one moment of light to the conversation there.
Before you go, Doc, I want in that to understand, you made mention of health tourism. I want you to explore that a bit more in your presentation. Could you?
The observation I want to make is that Dan is going down the right road in this sense. Look at what happened to the Bahamas in the last 15 years. They took about $3 billion plus US dollars and invested it to change the tourism product by bringing people to the Bahamas to buy financial services, copying the two richest islands we have in the Caribbean, the Cayman and Bermuda. They invested deliberately, like she was saying, $5 billion to change the product. But they didn't say, come through the ports. They said, come for the purpose of visiting our caves or buying or financial services. Come to buy legal services, accounting services, and all those things to make financial deals. That's the right approach, and it doesn't have to be financial services. It could be any of the services like Chris has been saying, because you have a broad picture of the meaning of tourism, the reasons people come to your island to do business, whatever the business is, whether it's to fet or to buy education services or healthcare services of the kind you're mentioning. But you have to get it done. You have to make up your mind to put up the money and invest in developing the capacity to deliver the services.
And that's where it's changed, Brendan. Tourism used to be packaged tourism. They used to call it packaged tourism. And there were limited packages that they could present. So you had a plane, a hotel, and that was your package put together. Since social media now, you have so many different people that have different interests. And some of those people will come because of the traditions or the food is a big thing, leisure. Some people come for leisure. It's amazing to me that 82% of people now book their holiday on their phone. They research on their phone and book on their phone. And that just shows you the type of people, that millennial group, I think they're called, those people. They have hundreds of different reasons for coming. And we don't want to tie ourselves down to any one reason because we need all of those different reasons to fill the plane. So we do want to perfect what is unique to Tobago. because that will attract some people and hopefully attract them to come back, because we do have a big repeat guest. But we also need to, as Vanis was saying, the health, the sport, all of those things can be part of that mix for different times of the year. And as I've said all along, if we get this right, because of the Trinidad island with 1.3 million people on it, we can actually have year-round tourism, because the Trinidadians come here when the foreigners don't. Yeah. So if we target our marketing correctly and very precisely to those different needs, and that's not easy because these variant interests are changing daily. I mean, when I see the reports, the analytics that I get sent, it's amazing the different things that people want day by day, month by month. And that's where we have to put the dialogue into, understanding that so we maximize the airlift that we're getting and maximize the visitors that we get. We get as most money out of them as we can. We shouldn't say that.
Okay, we have 5 more minutes. Any more questions from the floor?
Brendan, let me just make this one point, since we are on the whole issue of tourism and heritage. The intent of the program, the Heritage Festival, just as Diana said, was that opening night is for the world and everyone else to just have a taste of the product that should be there in the villages throughout the year. And then the funds would have been found in order to set up the kind of infrastructure in the village. For example, you would have gone to Moriah during the course of the year to have a taste when the tourists come, whether they are the cruise ship, where they come on the airport or whatever, will go there and enjoy that during the entire year with all the facilities, with all the radio, the studios, and everything like that. That was the intent, Everything went back in 21 years. And I want to make this point. In 1998, I'm just making this because it's relevant today, the opening night of the Heritage Festival, the Prime Minister was there, Mr. Pandey. And the theme, and pay attention to it, the theme of that year's opening was Children Come Home. You remember that? Children Come Home. You remember that? I did the opening that night, the chief said. What we're saying is, Tobago is an island that changed hands 32 times. Dutch owned here once, the French owned here, the British owned here, the Hollanders were here, the Scots were here. And what we're saying, nobody else, no other island in the Caribbean has that kind of thing to offer. And we were asking them to come home, including our Tobagonians and Trinidadians in the diaspora in Trinidad. Come home. And not come home to the fete alone, but to invest. We have something to offer. You imagine the French coming home to see where their foreparents, grandfather and grandmother were doing, the Dutch, the Hollanders, the British. We have a tourism product here that we're playing with, we don't understand. It's no hotels in Tobago should be empty. If we understand what we were doing in Tobago, and I'm sure we can go back there now and fix it. That is one of the things we should fix.
In fact, that first year, we had the landing of the Hollanders. The original people came, and that Heritage Festival was most interesting for anybody to go and actually, I was skating out the bank to go every evening to each one, to gather the culture, to gather the heritage. You were going night to night, for 2 weeks straight, just going to capture all of it. What was happening during the day at 3 o'clock. You will work through lunch to try and go to get what was happening down in Canaan Bonaccord. And so I think that we probably have lost our way and need to be found, surely.
Well, let me just give some comfort to Mr. Charles and Diane. I don't know if you read it in the budget.
Give us comfort?
Yes, because the heritage for 2023 will be homecoming, pilgrimage. And that is part of the diaspora. That is a deliberate project that is being built out to bring home the diaspora for that event and to also share with them the investment opportunities that will be available for them to invest in Tobago's development. So in that whole series for Heritage 2020 next year, there will be a component where you have presentation about the development strategy, where you're going to the island, how the diaspora can participate. And that's why Mr. Duke, in the new division of the Office of the Deputy Chief Secretary, he is mandated to deal with the diaspora mobilization and to have them ready to participate in the development of the island. And we are also calling, and not only the international diaspora, but our local people, because we have about 500 Tobagonians living in Trinidad, and we want to get them 500,000, sorry. We want to have them participating effectively in the development of the island as we go forward.
Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we got to wrap here. I want to ask our Deputy President of the Tobago Chapter to come and give the vote of thanks. Mr. Ricardo Duke.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening, good afternoon. I just want to say what an exciting morning we all had hearing from this esteemed team of speakers in understanding and breaking down the 2022 to 23 budget, making it simple to understand to all of us, the man in the street and each and every Tobagonian, what is in store for us and the way forward. So I want to start by saying to the invited panelists, team of panelists, invited guests, those watching on the different platforms, ladies and gentlemen of the audience here, it's my esteemed privilege to have been asked to prepare a vote of thanks for the following, to this first annual post-budget panel discussion. On behalf of myself and the Tobago Chapter of TAIFA and its entire board members here, I extend a hearty vote of thanks to the following. Firstly, I want to extend a great deal of thanks to Mr. Sylvan Rollox and family for allowing us the use of the Rovanel's conference room free of charge. Thanks to them for that. Secondly, the panel of speakers, the esteemed panel of speakers here today. I don't think we could have gotten a better team at this point in time. So to Mr. Anselm Richards, Mr. Chris James, Ms. Diane Haddad, Mr. Hotroy Charles, and Mr. Vanus James, we say thank you. Thank you very much. It's been a long time since we had an explanation like this on the way forward for Tobago. Thirdly, to our Tobago Chapter President, Mr. Brendan Gray, and the Tobago Chapter Board of TAIFA for planning and executing this discussion in such a short space of time. I remember when we met with the Chief Secretary, that was on the 13th. We had a very short time when he accepted in having a post-budget panel discussion. So thanks very much to the hard-working team of the Tobago Chapter of TAIFA and our President, Mr. Brendan Gray, in getting this off. We also want to say thank you to Tatil and Tatil Life for partially sponsoring the entire event and will continue to be a sponsor in the years ahead. Thank you very much, Tatil and Tatil Life. Thank you also goes out to Parks International Construction for also being a partial sponsor. We say thank you very much, Parks International. Thank you also goes to Tobago Updates for carrying the debate live on Facebook and all the other platforms. We also want to say a very special thanks to our TAIFA head office and executives Particularly, I want to mention Ms. Audra Spence for support and guidance on bringing this together. So, Audra, if you're listening in Trinidad, we want to say thank you very, very much for helping us get this done. And I have one more. I hope I didn't leave out anyone, but I have one more here, Mr. Dwayne White, for providing the music and providing the national anthem and so on while we were to start this program. So we say thank you. I want to say a special thanks to our audience, our live audience here at Rovenel's Resort, those who are listening on the platform and various Facebook and all the others. We want to say thanks for tuning in and taking a look as we want to really, really make this a success going forward. Thank you very, very much for spending the time and taking the time off to listen what the panel of speakers had discussed here today. So, ladies and gentlemen, I just want to say this brings us to the end of our post-budget debate and discussions for today. For this year, you have been a lovely audience, I must say. Thanks for all the questions that was posted, and we look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you very much.
I would want to add that if there is a second budget, if we get more than we asked for, obviously there would be another incursion, and we will try, if that is so, have a post-discussion on that again. So we look forward to that. Look out for that in the future.
If you get more than you asked for?
If we get, well, I say it that way because of what Mr. Charles has just put on the table. What he has just put on the table is that is only part of what our budget information should be, or incursion, or income should be. He put another thing on the table, and I'm very excited about that. He has made a very, very important incursion by saying that the transfers is only part of the income for Tobago. Yes? So we will be looking at that and getting more information on that. So again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, everyone. I want to say, let's have a wonderful time. Let's keep focused and let's go forward. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I also, before I go to, I would want to say Channel 5 is here and the media is here. Some of the medias are here. I want to thank them for being here and working with us on this. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
There's no mention of those overdrafts in this document.
Facilities in the law and the use.
It's in the law.